step back because you make a good point in kind of illuminating these different examples that are proliferating across countries in Africa. And we often take such a US centric standpoint because that's really where a lot of these companies who are creating AI technology are based. And you've said that Africa's digital transformation is really a frontier for the geopolitics of digital technologies broadly. How are you seeing this play out with AI, and what can the US learn from it that perhaps we're just underestimating?
Africa and perhaps Asia and Latin America currently are in an interesting position where everybody, that is the US and China writ large, are trying to get them to fashion the transformation pathways to their belief. So you have either the kinds of technologies you're told you can use. I think Huawei was familiar in the US context, being banned in the US. That argument to African countries is moot because that company and Chinese technology has been the backbone of the infrastructure that has connected us today. But at the same time, while they have the hardware element locked, the social media, the application layer is predominantly US companies that we're leveraging, and then the entry of TikTok. So those geopolitics of decoupling then tend to be moot in our context. With AI, but what that translates into practice remains to be seen, because a lot of this tends to follow a cut and paste model. Erase Europe, add Africa in there, and then launch it, shake hands, and we call it a strategy. But is it representative of the not just the governments but other stakeholders who are supposed to buy into it and be guided by that in AI adoption? So there's a lot of that that rustling that we don't, and jostling, I should say, that informs a lot of what is called African digital policy making. But I think what has been emerging more and more from African policymakers is that for them, the most urgent task is how to leverage digital to deliver dividends, addressing jobs, addressing climate change. We have a climate summit going on in Kenya right now. The big question would be, if you say AI, what does that have to do with the climate urgency that we have to do? So those practical questions still color and bring an interesting pushback to the typical geopolitical conversation on technologies.
There's one interesting thing that one thing I find particularly interesting about Africa as a continent is the number of languages and regional dialects that are spoken by people, often by groups that aren't very large. And although we sort of briefly touched on this at one point, I wonder if you think AI could help either bridge the gaps between communities or languages spoken, whether that's to help spread information or just in general, help people feel better informed about what's going on around them.
More represented.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, absolutely. That's where I can definitely, smile and give a positive outlook, because the diversity of languages also means diversity of knowledge, wisdom that hasn't been, captured, that can help us, reorder the world. AI technologies like the Common Voice project that Mozilla and others have been running can help us capture that knowledge, again, with the conditions that this is not just for extractive for some company somewhere to go and sell some intellectual property limited sort of like, bounded instrument, but will actually help us build a new commons that is more representative of the world and representative of a majority of people who have not informed how the world is ordered today.
To shift it back to the United States for a bit, one of the fears swirling around AI right now is that it could further erode the public's trust in institutions here, especially as we have a an election coming up in 2024. Do you think, in some of the countries you spoke about, do you think that AI can actually help empower people to participate in the political process?
I think it can, but again, it's not just about the technology itself. I think AI is just the latest iteration of technology showing us that the intrinsic motivation driving their use, their adoption, and their iteration is what determines that outcome. So, for example, it turns out that the popular chatbots, ChatGPT, Bard, and others, are so easily hackable to actually drive a different agenda from what is bounded as a response mechanism. If we tell people rely on, I don't know, a chatbot to let you know about the electoral process, if that is hacked and it feeds them misinformation, you sort of fed them to the wolves. And working that back could be, it could be difficult, and oftentimes you don't think about that.
A tool, not a replacement.
Yeah, assistance. And I mean, on that note, do you think, as far as Africa and African countries are concerned, do you think it's the democracy that needs to change or technology?
Both.
Both.
They both need to change. The challenge we're having, and this decade is really laid it bare for the continent, is the tick box has always been elections, and we're seeing that the more and more other countries are having elections, the less and less democracy dividends are being delivered. Nigeria just had its own moment. In fact, just today as we're speaking, they're waiting to find out the rulings from a tribunal that was set up to assess whether it was a free, fair election. And we're seeing a lot more of that. Western Central Africa, we're seeing coups happening post electoral processes or democratic processes. There's a lot of grievance there, and we need to listen to that. A lot of that has been argued that as a young people who are discontent with the way the world is ordered, there's a valid point there that we need to assess. Not to talk down to, but to really understand where these grievances are. I like to say when we think about the world today, for a younger generation on this continent, they're living in an age where many cans have been kicked down the road and they're starting to face them even before they've found their way in the world. Will technology help them make sense of it, or will it actually aggravate and give power holders more tools to control them? These depend a lot on how we order the society. So both things have to be thought of in parallel. And I like to say, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I mean, very last point then from me is we have seen, as you say, a number of military coups in Africa in recent times. Is AI something that's playing a central or even a peripheral role in those, whether for good or to counter them?
Well, certainly where bots and disinformation for hire accounts exist, they have been used to pass certain messages or seed certain messages in certain communities. I mentioned Gabon, where there was even the illusion of a deep fake. It was analyzed later and found not to be a deep fake, but that was after a coup attempt had happened because it was believed to be so. That message had already spread.
So it's too late.
It was too late. I mean, now that that we can fact check after the fact, but if people were willing, there's a readiness to believe that speaks to other discontentments that the perfect opportunity arose to feed that. I wouldn't want to make it a causality, but there's absolutely something there that speaks to the fact that the way AI works is delivering in the way that society is already primed for it to operate.
intelligence has been used in Hollywood for years, but the recent boom in generative AI has sparked one of the biggest upheavals the film and television industry has ever seen.
The latest technology can generate scripts and replicate faces and voices of actors without them ever stepping foot on set. It's raised alarm among creatives who are concerned about how their work will be used and whether AI will render them obsolete.
Proponents argue AI can bolster creativity, not diminish it, automating mundane filmmaking tasks that require more time and money when left to humans.
So on this episode of AI IRL, we'll hear from experts across the industry who have different visions of how artificial intelligence will transform entertainment and where that leaves human ingenuity.
If there's one thing everyone can agree on, it's that AI-generated films and TV will hit the red carpet sooner or later. The question will be, who gets the credit? Duncan Crabtree Ireland, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're the National Executive Director and the Chief Negotiator for the Screen Actors Guild. AI has emerged as a key issue among Hollywood actors and other creatives, but it's been used in the industry for years. What is it about generative AI that poses such a threat?
Well, I think really it's the fact that the capabilities of generative AI really haven't even been tapped. The surface hasn't been scratched yet on them. And the idea that, that there could be an AI tool that could help do traditional editing a little more efficiently or provide some additional capabilities there is one thing. The idea that you could have an AI tool that's used to create digital replicas of performers and then actually convincingly create performances that appear as if they did them when they had nothing to do with them whatsoever, that is a sea change in the capability of this type of technology. And it's one that our members are hugely worried about, and rightly so. And frankly, all of us in this society should be worried about this kind of capability.
I mean, just to be super clear, just for anyone who's not aware of like the technical requirements of doing something like this is the idea of essentially capturing an actor's likeness, potentially their performance style and their voice, and then saying, well, we've got that now, that's in the system, we can just essentially reuse that for whatever we want in future.
That's exactly right. And in fact, lest anyone think that this is some sort of overwrought concern or something that is just speculation, the studios and streamers literally proposed that they should have the right to do that in this negotiation. On July 11th, they gave us proposals in writing that said that background actors should be able to engage them to work for one day, pay them for one day's work, create a digital replica of them by scanning them, and then have the right to use that digital replica forever with no further consent and no further compensation. And they made a similar proposal for principal performers, that's like speaking part performers, for any kind of franchise.
Well, how about Indiana Jones, where Harrison Ford was de-aged using AI? What role should artificial intelligence play in Hollywood going forward?
When we came into this negotiation, we could have proposed just a ban on the use of AI as it relates to performers. We did not do that. We came in with 4 very complex and nuanced proposals that were designed to really let the industry use AI as long as it was being done with informed consent on the part of the performers affected and fair compensation for whatever's being done. So when we talk about things like de-aging, other types of uses, that's absolutely fine if it's done with the consent of the performer. And that's something that certainly, using that example from the Indiana Jones movie, obviously they planned that out. That wasn't some sort of last minute surprise that they were going to use de-aging technology for that. And from what I understand, that was discussed with and approved by Harrison Ford. So, the kind of use of these technologies, when done with the informed consent of the performer, it can be helpful to production. And it's not something that we're opposing. What we're opposing is companies feeling that they have the right to just do that without getting any kind of informed consent.
And are these, as far as negotiations on deals and things are concerned, like, are these non-negotiables from your standpoint? What other non-negotiables are there?
Well, I mean, the principle is non-negotiable. The principle that actors need to have informed consent over the creation of a digital replica and the use of that digital replica and fair compensation, that's not negotiable. Clearly, I mean, we need those are basic principles that need to be enshrined. The mechanism by which those would be carried out, absolutely is negotiable. We negotiated over it for 35 days with the companies. We would have been negotiating over it more since then if the companies would have come back to the table instead of having us be out on strike for 75 days with no discussions over these things. So, we don't come to negotiations saying, there are conditions on these negotiations or this and that are non-negotiable. Having said that, if the principles we're talking about are enshrined, we are very open to discussing the mechanism by which that happens, and we have that.
In terms of like the history of technological impacts on cinema and Hollywood, where does AI in this current debate sit in terms of severity? Is it unprecedented?
So these are, in our view, existential issues, and they're issues that we really have to address now, because given the developments in generative AI over the last 12, 18 months, we certainly can't wait another 3-year contract cycle to address them. We can't even wait a year to address them. I had 14-year-olds come up to me on the picket line at Disney saying how concerned they were about not being able to have a career as an actor because they felt like AI was going to take away their jobs. I mean, when 14-year-old performers are saying this to you, you really have to listen.
Unprecedented times, Jackie.
Definitely. Do you think AI will continue to be a sticking point in negotiations going forward?
We did make some progress during the first part of negotiations, but as I mentioned before, there were proposals put out right at the end of our negotiating period that were really inconsistent with the idea of informed consent and fair compensation. And so the only AI deal that we're going to agree to is an AI deal that reflects those principles. How it's implemented, still some bargaining to do, but those principles must be enshrined in the contract.
Do you think we're going to get replaced, Jackie?
I hope not.
Yeah, me too. Well, Duncan, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Tim Weber, great to have an Oscar winner on the show today. So thank you very much for coming in, Pleasure. You're a visual effects supervisor, chief creative